and why do you think the government is withholding information?
There's a lot of people, both at the Pentagon and at the CIA, that are trying to figure out how to have this conversation with the American people.
When it comes to disclosure, the real question that has to be answered by everybody is, it depends on what is disclosed.
There is no doubt in your mind that we are not alone. Welcome back to Dr. Phil Podcast. Very interesting today. Some of you are going to be intrigued because you're just interested. Some of you are going to be intrigued because you are concerned. I'm talking to former senior intelligence official and whistleblower, Luis Elizondo, and award-winning writer, producer, and journalist, Bryce Zabel, who exposed the secrets hidden in government reports about Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, UAP, also known as UFOs. From the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, to legislation spearheaded by Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio referencing non-human intelligence, they both unravel explosive claims of recovered alien technology, biological specimens, and Navy pilot videos of seemingly impossible maneuvers. Now, as drones and covert operations raise questions about national security, Elizondo and Zabel shed light on the growing transparency movement and ask the ultimate question: what does the government really know, and why isn't it telling us? Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me. Everybody now knows who you guys are, and I am sure leaning forward into this subject matter. You know, I used to think and comment on this as, I would say, a healthy degree of skepticism. My biggest concern was that every time I saw someone on camera talking about this, he was somebody in a dirty gimme cap. But of late, we have seen very sophisticated aviators. We have seen military pilots reporting very interesting and unexplainable phenomenon, and we have seen evidence of government reports that suggest that this isn't just somebody that has had their daily 12-pack sitting on a boat somewhere reporting things that, you know, maybe were a bit suspect. I've heard it from much more credible sources, and I have a bias because I kind of want it to be true, because I want to learn more about what's going on in the universe. Luis, let me start with you. You believe that there's a lot more going on than the government is sharing with us. And my first question to you is that true? And why do you think the government is withholding information?
Well, great question, Dr. Phil. First and foremost, to answer your first question, yes, the government has had a long-standing interest in this topic from a national security perspective. There are copious amounts of documentation that establishes this fact going back to 1950, and quite frankly, probably a lot earlier than that. Why this is a concern and has been and continue to be a concern for the United States is simply because it illustrates the fact that we do not have what we call U.S. air domain awareness. After 2000, if you remember the terrible events of 2001 during 9/11, there was this basically reaction by the U.S. government to make sure that it had control of its airspace, what we call air domain awareness. And time again, it's been proven that we simply do not. One can only look back at the recent drone flap over New Jersey, simply 2 months ago, as a very graphic illustration of how we do not have control or cognizance over our U.S. airspace. And so from that perspective, the government has a long-standing interest in the topic of UAP, or more formally known in the vernacular as UFOs. And you're right, Dr. Phil, there's a tremendous amount of testimony now that's coming forward, both behind the green curtain, if you will, and in the open press by whistleblowers. These are trained observers, military personnel, law enforcement personnel, intelligence officers, in some cases, very senior intelligence officers that are all coming out and now having a conversation with the American people and the media about the reality of this topic.
Bryce, do you agree? Does the government know a lot more than they're telling us?
I think that's what the fact trail shows. But, Phil, just from a psychological point of view, I mean, people come up to me all the time because they know I'm interested in this. And they say, do you believe in UFOs? And I say, well, of course I believe in UFOs. They're unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. The questions really are, who are they? Why are they here? And who's flying them? And so I think we've moved into a new phase that your question suggests, which is, in the old world, it was like, well, are people just making this stuff up? Are they drunk or on drugs, or are they just liars or hoaxers? And that's really the old school way of thinking about it, because now even our government has admitted that this phenomenon is a real one. And you don't have to take my word for it or even lose. I mean, the truth of the matter is, in the U.S. Senate just last year, Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Mike Rounds, a Democrat and a Republican, two fairly sober individuals, introduced legislation that mentioned the word non-human intelligence 22 times. So I feel like where we're coming to right now, and it's appropriate for you to have skepticism and for your listeners and viewers to have skepticism. But if you start to scratch beneath the surface, as Lou is suggesting, you realize there's documentation, but there's also case after case after case, and good cases, not people seeing dancing lights in the sky from a distance, but craft and other things. So yeah, I think Lou is correct. We are entering a new period where the government itself seems to be leading in the direction of, let's talk about this and let's see what's really going on.
Does the government have alien technology, biological specimens? I mean, do they have stuff that is not of this planet? I mean, do they have things that there is no trail, no evidence, nothing that can be traced to anything that we know of on this planet? It doesn't mean that it might not be of this planet. We haven't discovered it yet, but somebody has. I mean, do they have this evidence and they're not sharing it with the public? Louis, what do you know that I don't know?
Sure. Well, let me, if I can, just as a disclaimer here, I still have my security clearance with the United States government. And so because of that, I am still held by my non-disclosure agreement. But what I can say is what I've been cleared to say by the Pentagon previously, and that is that the U.S. government is in possession of extremely exotic material of unknown origin. And I can also say, after, by the way, a year of a back and forth dialogue with the Pentagon, I can also say now, without getting into trouble, that biologics or biological specimens and samples were recovered from some of the crashes involving some of this very, very exotic technology. This conversation is dynamic. It's ongoing right now. There's a lot of people, both at the Pentagon and at the CIA and within our intelligence community, that are trying to figure out how to have this conversation with the American people. Why is that? It's because it's been over 70 years of misinformation that has been put out. And now the government finds itself in a situation where it has to basically unwind that tape. Despite telling the American people that there's nothing to see here, it turns out that there was quite a bit to see. And this sense of stigma and taboo, which, as you mentioned yourself, Phil, in the beginning, has tended to relegated this conversation to kind of the backwaters of fringe conspiracies. And it turned out that it's actually very, very true.
Let's give a case. Lou knows many cases. And again, he is not allowed to speak about them under his NDAs, et cetera. But let's face it, I think you alluded to it. There is work that's been done, but the government hasn't been showing its work. And we can look forward to a time when we possibly don't need the government to show its work, that we'll have the technology to reveal this secret to ourselves. But make no mistake, there are many, many videos, many photos, and possibly craft and bodies out there that the government has had and had for a long time. And I'll give you one case that your audience has certainly heard about, and that's Roswell. And we've been encouraged to think about that one as, that's just a TV series with kids in it or something. It's just not a serious thing, but it's very serious. In 1947, when Roswell occurred, the Roswell Army Air Base at that time was the only nuclear bomber base, not only in the United States, but in the entire world. And if you talk to the researchers who have gone to the Roswell area and talked to witnesses over the years, there's some 600 witnesses to different aspects of how they handled that material. And they handled it with such care, with such extraordinary secrecy, that you'd have to say, if it really was a weather balloon, who would do that? I mean, no one on their deathbed confessed to it was really a weather balloon. But a lot of people have talked about how the Roswell case was a real thing. And that includes Apollo astronauts who have said it. Edward Mitchell said it. And he was the pilot of Apollo 14, and he grew up in Roswell. So that's just one case. There are many others. But I think we're entering a period where we're going to have to rewrite all the history books, because given that such a thing could have occurred, and I believe did occur, then that means the entire history that's gone on since then has been a hidden history.
Struggling with sleepless nights and exhausting days? Well, Beam's Dream Powder can change that. Beam is proudly founded in America and run by people who value hard work, integrity, and delivering results. Beam's Dream Powder is a healthy nighttime blend packed with science-backed ingredients shown to improve sleep so you'll wake up ready for the day. Dream is made with a powerful blend of all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Plus, Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of up to 40% off. Try their Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil. That's shop BEAM.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil for up to 40% off. Sleep better, wake up stronger, and show up ready for your family, work, and country. Your body is a system, and when it's running right, you feel focused, energized, in flow, but sometimes we struggle to find that flow state. Why? Because there's too much static in our system, brain fog, fatigue, and inflammation. The Echo Flask clears the static by infusing your water with molecular hydrogen, a natural science-backed gas that helps your body think sharper, recover faster, and run smoother. This is more than hydration. It's better focus, more energy, faster recovery, less internal stress, and longer-term benefits that keep you sharp. When your water works harder, your whole system does too. Find your flow state with the Echo Flask hydrogen water bottle and get an unlimited supply of hydrogen water at home and on the go. Visit echowater.com/Phil and use code Phil for 10% off. That's echowater.com/Phil. Enter code Phil to save 10%. You know, I spent a lot of my career in the litigation arena, and so I approach this in terms of evidence. And I know that my viewers and listeners know that I'm very much a scientist and empiricist. I want to give them the most non-circumstantial, non-inferential evidence that we can. And Louis, I certainly don't want to ask you to tread on any NDAs or boundaries that you have with your security clearance at all. But in terms of what we can talk about, what is the best evidence we have, the absolute best hard evidence we have that something not of this world, not of planet Earth, exists, that tells us that some intelligent life form not of planet Earth exists and has visited this planet?
Wow. So a lot to unpack there. Let me see if I can start from the beginning. First and foremost, I agree with your perspective on evidence driving the conversation. My background, I went to school, University of Miami, and I was in the medical program. I graduated as a microbiologist, immunologist, and I studied parasites. So I've always considered myself a disciple of the scientific methods and principles. And then later I became a special agent and ultimately a special agent in charge, working national security crimes. So espionage, terrorism, and things like that, where my job was to present information in essence to a jury and present that information in a way that allowed the jury to come up with a result. And in this case, if you were to ask me, based upon the empirical evidence that I have been and my colleagues have been privy to, we are well beyond reasonable doubt. Any rational-minded jury would have no choice but to convict and say, yes, this is real. Let's not forget, as Bryce had just indicated, we had multiple senior officials in the government already come out and have this conversation. We had a former director of the CIA. We had a former director of the National Intelligence, DNI, Radcliffe. We had a former president of the United States all come out and say, yeah, there's something to this, and this is a national security issue. So what is the best evidence? Well, it's kind of like choosing my favorite child. Each case is different. Each of them can be extremely compelling. In some cases, we have ultra high definition video of these things 15 feet away from a cockpit of an aircraft. Which is, it's not a blurry object you see from far away. It's crystal clear. It's very, very clearly something that is not our technology. And then when you look at this and you look at the temporal aspect, which I think is very important here, let's go back 70 years where we have actually radar tracks of these things doing 10,000, 13,000 miles an hour in low Earth atmosphere, where the air friction is almost impossible to deal with at those speeds. Where were we as a nation? Well, we had just barely broken the sound barrier, and we hadn't even been into space yet. So when you look at these things performing in ways where they're put this in compare and contrast it, the average human being can withstand about 9 G forces for a short period of time before their medical consequences, things such as blackouts, redouts, and ultimately death. If you compare that to one of the most highly maneuverable manned aircraft we have today, it's the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. It's an older air platform, but still considered one of the most highly maneuverable. And that can perform at the unclassified level about 17, 18 Gs before you start having structural failure, meaning wings begin to snap off and the airframe will begin to disintegrate around you as you're flying it. These are objects that we are recording that are doing not 18, 19, 20 Gs. They're doing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs. They're performing these maneuvers while traveling at hypersonic velocity, 5 times the speed of sound. So think about that. And by the way, we do have some aircraft that can fly at those speeds. For example, the Lockheed YF-12A SR-71, aka the Blackbird. But when that is flying at, let's say Mach 5, when it wants to take a right-hand turn, it takes roughly half the state of Ohio to execute that maneuver. And what we are seeing are objects going several times faster than that and able to perform immediate right-angle turns, 180-degree turns. And so if any country back in the 1950s or 60s had this technology, meanwhile, the very best of our intelligence community had absolutely no clue, this would be considered probably the greatest intelligence failure our country has ever faced, eclipsing that of even 9/11, because that means someone has been able to develop this technology in secret and deploy it back at a time where we had barely broken the sound barrier, right? And if you look at our adversaries, where was Russia? Well, they had not yet, or were just on the cusp of deploying the atomic bomb, demonstrating they had the atomic weapon, and China was in a famine. So what country on earth had that ability back then? I think it'd be kind of like trying to, if you would, compare walking into King Tut's tomb for the very first time back in the 1920s and all of a sudden discovering a fully assembled 747 jet plane in there, commercial aircraft. It doesn't make sense temporally.
I'm the son of a history teacher, so I look at the historical narrative as much as Lewis covered specifically some of the things that they're doing right now. And I would suggest they've been doing these things all through history, particularly since World War II. I'm not going to get into naming, there's hundreds of cases, but like, for example, in 1952, over 2 weekends, clusters of these UFOs flew over the nation's capital and were seen by so many people. And it even knocked the Democratic Convention that summer off the front page in Washington. And these UFOs that were flying over the Capitol took the front page. Imagine if that happened today. I mean, my goodness, we'd be all over it. So I approve of what you're saying. You think that we should, we should try to apply science and reason, and I think that's fantastic. And one of the things that I would just suggest is if you do that and you're trying to ask yourself, well, what could be the possible explanations for this? I'll give you what I think they could be. Number one would be that people are just getting it wrong. All right. You'd have to believe that the nature of consciousness and perception is such that hundreds of thousands of people over 80 years have gotten it wrong. Or you'd have to believe that people we know are flawed and sometimes do lie. So you'd have to say that could be an explanation. And the third one would be, it's, as Lou implied, it would be the largest hoax of disinformation ever perpetrated in human history. Or the fourth one, which is something anomalous is actually going on and has been going on for a while. So I encourage everybody to start looking into it and taking it seriously, because that's really what's held us back over all these years. The policy that goes back to 1953, when there was a government commission with the CIA in a declassified document where they said, we need to come up with a policy of denial and ridicule. That's how we answer this. And denial and ridicule work so well that stigma has still existed somewhat through today, although those twin pillars are starting to fall even as we speak, your show being an example of that.
Hey, Dr. Phil here. Your savings are at risk. With the economy on shaky ground, the dollar losing value, and a $2 trillion deficit, things could spiral. Don't wait for the worst. Take control of your financial future now. I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. What are you going to do to protect what's yours? Claim your special offer and learn how to reinforce your financial future. Visit drphilgold.com to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Visit drphilgold.com today. The next time you gather with family, enjoy Balance of Nature supplements as an addition to your favorite dishes. Our veggie supplement, made from 15 ingredients like garlic, onion, and cayenne pepper, can easily be opened and added to your favorite dishes like homemade soups or dips. Not to mention our fruits supplement, which is made from 16 ingredients like banana, strawberries, and mango, making it a great addition to your homemade smoothies. Start your journey with Balance of Nature. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com to get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first preferred set as a new preferred customer, with free shipping and our money-back guarantee. Go to balanceofnature.com or call 1-800-246-8751 and get this special offer by using discount code Dr. Phil. That's DRPHIL. But what's the point? I know there's a certain arrogance to, hey, we're the only ones. And that certainly is an arrogant attitude. But what's the upside to the denial across time if these craft we're seeing on radar at such great speeds and maneuverability, credible, reliable witnesses in terms of military pilots that are trained? I've been a pilot since I was a teenager. You're trained to spot traffic and aircraft and that sort of thing. And when you see something that's close enough that you can tell its composition, you've gotten way too close to another airplane. And that is a very unusual occurrence. That doesn't happen every day. You are required to report that as a near miss and et cetera. But when you have people that are credible that are reporting these things, and they're not, you don't see them seeking notoriety, fame, fortune, anything of the sort. They're just reporting it as in the scope of their duties. You have to start saying, okay, we need to take this seriously. What is the motive to hide this, to deny this, to ridicule this? What's the motive?
You'd have to look to history. In 1960, for example, the Rand Corporation did a report on what would happen if we sort of disclosed that we are not, or found out at that time, the way they looked into it, that we are not alone. And they were very, very concerned that people might not handle the truth very well. So that's the number one reason that has potentially explained it over the years. I think there was a concern that saying to people, by the way, there's another intelligence operating on our planet. We don't really know exactly what it is, and we can't do much about it. I think the feeling was that would hit the public with the same magnitude as the JFK assassination or Pearl Harbor or 9/11, and that it would radically change the world we live in the way that COVID or the stock market crash back in 1928 did. And so people have been concerned about that. I don't share that concern now. I think we live in a different time. But let me turn it back to Lou for the national security, because that's clearly what has driven a lot of this over the years.
Well, first of all, we have a long history of suppressing information that doesn't comport to our current understanding of our world and our paradigm that we live in. Case in point, countries like ours, you're supposed to classify information simply to protect sources and methods and keep information out of the hands of the enemy. But the reality is we have a long history of abusing that process for other reasons. One of them is to protect the psyche of the American people. And two, also, is that the U.S. government and other governments don't like to admit a problem for which there is no solution. So case in point, when back in the 50s, when the CIA was working with Lockheed Skunk Works to build the U-2 airplane in contravention of the treaty we had with Russia, when we first started flying the airplane, we wanted to build a plane that could fly faster and higher than any other aircraft so we could actually fly over mainland Russia and take photographs, reconnaissance. And so we did just that. And guess what? The Russians didn't respond. So mission success. It wasn't until the Russians were able to develop the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shoot down a U-2 and parade the pilots in front of the United Nations and the wreckage, that the Russians even admit to their own people that they were actually tracking every single flight that we had over Russia. But they did not want to make a big deal of it or even announce it to anybody, especially their own people, until they had a solution for it. And let's look at this topic now. Historically, height of the Cold War, you had then Soviet Union against the United States in this kind of winner-takes-all proxy chess game around the world. And despite the words of the Cold War being cold, it actually was pretty hot. There was a lot of activity going on in the world, and it was us versus them. And they, by the way, had their own UFO program too. A lot of people don't know that, but neither country wanted to admit that there was this technology out there for which there was no solution. We did not want to let the American people know that there was any other type of threat that was, frankly, far more sophisticated than the Soviets and even us. And then you, of course, have the other issue about governmental preeminence, the idea that governments work only because the people have faith and confidence in those institutions, and we expect solutions by our government. And so here's another example for you and your audience. Back when the Dead Sea Scrolls were first found in the late 40s, it was many, many years before the scientific community actually released the translation of those Dead Sea Scrolls. And the reason was, one of the primary reasons, is that we were afraid it was going to upset the current Judeo-Christian belief system, that it was going to contradict the very moral fiber of our country. For the record, I disagree that these are legitimate reasons to keep information classified and away from the American people, but we have a long history of doing this, and so do other countries. And so when you have a topic like this about UFOs or UAP able to come into our controlled airspace without any type of impunity, they're able to interfere with our nuclear equities. This is a really tough conversation to have with the American people. And oh, by the way, we don't have a solution for it. So it's not in the best interest of governments to admit problems for which they have no solution. And I think this topic is certainly a very clear case of exactly that.
So you think there's and I certainly don't disagree with this, but that there could be mass hysteria if people thought there is a presence here to whom we are inferior. We are inferior technology-wise. We can't fly that fast. We don't have that level of technology. So there is someone besides us to whom we are scientifically, technologically, performance-wise inferior. So we're down the ladder. And that could create paranoia and mass hysteria.
Well, that was a fear. I agree with Bryce. I don't think that's the case anymore. But I do believe that was at the time, the mindset. And it was told to me while I was at the Pentagon that is exactly what the issue was. I do not think that is the case anymore. There is this concern that we have this idea that human beings are the apex, if you will, species on this planet. But if you are a scuba diver, you realize very quickly when you get into the big deep ocean that there's other things in there that are much bigger than you. And so I think it's uncomfortable for us to think that maybe, we're not at the top of the food chain, so to speak, proverbially speaking. But I also think that Phil, you bring up a really good point here, because everybody wants to know, are these things from outer space? And if so, where they're from. If I could share with you just one quick little story here. We're always learning something new about our existence here on this planet, this little tiny rock we call Earth. And if you look at modern human beings, a lot of anthropologists will suggest that modern human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, has been around for roughly the last 200 to 400,000 years in modern form. And if you compare that to a 24-hour clock, it was the Greeks roughly 2,000 years ago, or maybe the last 10 minutes of our existence, that realized there are two fundamental life forms on this planet, and you are either A, a plant, or you are B, an animal. And it wasn't until the Renaissance, roughly 355, 400 years ago, that we discovered an entirely different form of life on this planet that's been here cohabitating all along. That's neither plant nor animal, and that was the world of fungus. And so we pat ourselves on the shoulder and what clever little monkeys we are. And it wasn't but for the last 3 seconds of our existence on a 24-hour clock, the last 120 years, that we human beings actually discovered the true dominant life form on this planet. That in fact, if you were to take all the biomass of every plant and all the biomass of every animal and all the biomass of every fungus and add it all up together, it still will not add up to the hidden biomass of this life form that's been here and is a true dominant life form all along on this planet. And it wasn't until we had this technology to curve glass and put it into a little metal tube and famously shout the words, little beasties, did we discover the world of microorganisms that are inside every human being. They are on the skin of the ISS space station. They live miles beneath the Arctic ice in the crushing depths. And it thrives. And so when people ask me, are these things from outer space? My response is quite simple. They can be from outer space, inner space, or the space in between. They could be just as natural to Earth as we are, and we're at a point now where technologically maybe we can interact. Maybe they're from outer space. Maybe they're something else, as some of the folks in the Pentagon have proposed, as being interdimensional, right? Something, as we're now learning through the world of quantum physics, that it appears that there is this whole hidden world of reality that lies just beyond our ability to measure it or to interact with it directly.
Phil, I love what Lou just said, because it's one of those great explanations that puts it all in perspective. But the nature of your question is, what's the reason for secrecy? And a few years back, I wrote a book with historian Richard Dolan called After Disclosure. And we spent a year talking to people in every form of job description and ask them, how would this change your life if something like this happened? And I will say the religious argument came up all the time, although now I think you can say that the Catholic Church at least doesn't seem to have this problem with it. They seem to be talking openly about it. But the thing that came up over and over was the aerodynamic properties that Lou has described for some of these craft. Well, they're not driving around on gasoline. they're doing something else. There's a different kind of physics involved. And a lot of people pointed out over and over that the entire U.S. Transportation economy and energy economy is built on fossil fuels, and that might come crashing down if we begin to accept that there's something else out there using a different kind of science and technology. There were lots of other things. Obviously, the government's going to change, and history books are going to change, and culture is going to change. But that was the one that made people say, "Yeah, they don't want that to happen yet."
Bryce, you bring up a good point, by the way. Can I jump up real quick on your discussion about the church? Because I think people like to villainize the church a lot in these conversations, but the reality is, you're right. I think we're seeing an openness by the Vatican and other institutions, other religious institutions, because they learned the lesson from the days of Galileo, right? When he proposed a heliocentric model of our solar system, vice an Earth-centric. He paid almost the ultimate price. They were going to burn him at the stake, and he had to recant. In fact, they refused to even look through the very telescope to validate his observations. Now we look back and we say, "Wow, that was really silly. That was a dumb move on our part. Why would we have been so afraid of that?" At the end of the day, it didn't challenge any notion of religion or quote unquote a god. It just challenged our understanding at the time of religion.
If this is true, and if it exists, and people have a right to know it, how do you think this would be ultimately disclosed? Is there a point at which the government would say, "We do have evidence of this, and here it is"? I mean, we have this remnant of a crash, and this is metallurgically something that is not of this world, or we have some type of skeletal remain, or we have some type of body that has been preserved, or we have some type of communication that is ongoing. If this is disclosed, how do you think it will be disclosed?
Bill, you know that I used to be an investigative journalist, and I went to Hollywood, and I've spent years thinking about that very topic. I will say this: people like to think it's the president coming out and holding a news conference and saying, "And by the way, here are 3 terabytes of photos and videos. Knock yourselves out." And that's probably not going to be how it goes down. It could be anybody in basically official capacity, anyone from the Pope to the head of the United Nations. But more likely today is that one of two things will happen. We personally, as people, as humankind, will find a way to reveal to ourselves what's going on and push the governments into coming a little more clean than they have, or something else will happen. Now, famously, I like to say, by the way, there's one thing that we agree with whoever these others are about, and that is it should be secret, because we could have held a news conference over the last 80 years and revealed this, but we haven't. And they could have landed on the White House lawn or in Central Park and shown off some of their technology, but they haven't done that either. So something like that, though, could happen. If there is an event, something like that Washington overflight in 1952, spurs the debate so much that people start to come forward, that could do it. But the other remember today, we now live in a global economy. This isn't just the purview of the United States of America. It probably was around the 50s and 60s, because we were coming out of World War II and we were the top dog all over the world. There are a lot of other countries, by the way, who have had many of these sightings, have investigated them for themselves, and could easily come forward. It could be Brazil, it could be China, it could be Russia. And once somebody starts to say the words out loud that we have evidence that we're not alone, then it becomes almost a race to the forefront. We can't let, here in the United States, we couldn't let everybody else disclose, and we, fold our arms and hold our breath till we turn blue. No, we're going to have to get out there and have at least some kind of disclosure. Remember, as they said in Watergate, a limited modified hangout, possibly.
And I also wonder if I was advising the government from a psychological standpoint, and And like I say, I've spent a lot of time in the litigation arena, and you always want to handle everything on direct. You don't want somebody to bring something up on cross-examination that you didn't. It's a lot better to do this on friendly fire where you bring it up. We can certainly lose control of this narrative if whoever, whatever, from whichever world or not of this earth location decides they're going to have an event. They're going to land in Central Park, or they're going to land in some other country or something, and just say, surprise, here we are, debate's over. Then you do lose control of the narrative. And I would have to be saying to the government, if we have absolute irrefutable evidence, I would kind of want to bring that out before I lost control of the narrative, and all of a sudden they show up and it's like, yeah, we're stupid, we didn't know it. Or, yeah, we'll tell you now that we did, but we withheld it from you. It seems like they would want to get ahead of that.
Certainly, by the way.
I think you're seeing that happen right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, things have changed so much. Technology and social media and journalism used to be the only gatekeepers, but now that's not true. Now we have the internet and we have everything else. So I think there is quite likely a great deal of concern within the government these days as to doing exactly what you suggest. How do we get out ahead of this thing? And when do we do it? And what does that look like?
I also, if I may, I would submit that I think a lot of people think disclosure is an event. Again, maybe the president coming out and having a press briefing. But I think disclosure is actually a process, and I think it's a process we are already very well down the road. You already have members of this current administration and the previous administration and the one before that all coming out and saying, yes, there's validity to this. You now have members of Congress who has received classified briefings in a classified setting that are now coming out and saying, yes, we need to take this topic seriously. And you know what? There isn't panic on the streets, and people aren't running for their banks, or if they're running for the banks, it's certainly not for this reason. So I think we are seeing this conversation happening in a way where we can sensitize the public, socialize the public to the idea that this is not necessarily a threat. Just because we don't have all the answers doesn't mean that it's necessarily an issue or a problem. And I think, you know, the psyche of the American people has proven to be fairly resilient. I've always said that I think America can handle the truth, and I think America deserves the truth. I actually recently wrote a book, and if you want evidence that the government's actually now allowing this conversation to take place, is the fact that they allowed me, after a year review of my book, they allowed me to publish it. And I had some very, very detailed information in there. Some of it was very, very classified at one point. They still decided to redact portions of that book. The book was called Imminent, but they allowed it to be published. And you have people that were named in that book that were senior members of the U.S. government that were very well aware of our efforts, the U.S. government's efforts to investigate UFOs. So I do think the conversation's happening. It might be a little slower than people want, but compared to where we were just, the last 70 years, I think we've come further in the last 7 in this conversation than we have in the last 70.
Of course, gentlemen, when it comes to disclosure, the real question that has to be answered by everybody is it depends on what is disclosed. So if in fact, I would argue that Lou probably knows more than I do about what is actually happening because he's been on the inside. But there are people who have pretty good information, but it hasn't been disclosed. And you have to ask yourself, what's the reason for that? Is it possible that what the disclosure would be is a little unsettling? And obviously, simply saying we're not alone is a little unsettling, but if the idea is they're a problem, then that's a whole different thing. And I would just point out that going back to Roswell in 1947 and moving ahead, UAP have been historically seen near nuclear power facilities and nuclear weapons facilities. And you could look at that 2 ways. You could, if you think there are space brothers, maybe they're just looking into this to try to help us save our own planet. But if you think Otherwise, and you look at it from a military point of view, what do you do before you launch anything? You make sure that you understand what the other guy's got. You do information gathering and intel gathering on that. So again, I go back to what's going to be disclosed. That's what I am not sure of yet. And that could have a lot to do with where we are right now.
Well, let's assume, for argument's sake, that there is another civilization somewhere. Where is the most likely place that they would be located?
Well, I think realistically, there's two options. There's probably several other ones as well, but I think the most likely are they're not from this planet, or potentially they could be from underwater. They could be living happily underwater in some sort of, who knows, type of construct, and they've been here for quite some time. Look, we've only mapped less than 10% of the bottom of our ocean floors. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do the bottoms of our own oceans. And so is it possible that these things could be from down there? I think that's certainly a possibility as well. I'll let Bryce jump in, but I think those are kind of the two prevailing theories that we have within the U.S. government.
One was underwater. What was the other one?
Extraterrestrial.
Extraterrestrial, where?
Well, that's the big question, right? So you're looking at if you're looking at for a where or a place or a location, I think there's still quite a bit of discussion about that.
Okay.
It has to deal primarily with capabilities, your ability to travel long distances fairly efficiently, and the motivation for being here in the first place. What makes this planet so special, other than other planets, is that we have something very few planets have, and that's liquid water. We have hydrogen, which is very abundant in the universe. If one wanted to derive energy from hydrogen, it could take some time to mine that, because hydrogen tends to be rather diffuse. But hydrogen exists in a very concentrated form, in the form of water, H2O. And one would literally just have to remove the oxygen and have plenty of hydrogen if that was potentially a fuel source. So where they're from in out there in the cosmos, your guess is as good as mine. I would suspect it'd probably be a little bit closer than further away, simply because it takes a lot to travel those long distances.
If you were to tell me that I had to bet my house on this answer, I would say I would go with the extraterrestrial theory. But there are others. I wrote the first original film for the Sci-Fi Channel called Official Denial, and the explanation for where they were from in that film wasn't where they were from, but when. In that film, they were time travelers from the future, and they were us. So, I mean, I don't know that I buy into that, but it's possible. Just as they don't have to be from some other place, they can be from some other dimension. But there's theories upon theories. Say they are in the water right now. That may not mean that they started in the water. As Lou pointed out, water is throughout the universe. What if there's a water-based species from another world? When they came to Earth to explore, they wouldn't go to the land first. They'd go to the water, and that's where they'd be. And as he pointed out, we don't know that much about our own oceans. But I will say a good friend of both Lou and myself, Richard Dolan, has a 2-volume book coming out about USOs, which are unidentified submerged objects. And these sightings in our oceans, out of our oceans, go back hundreds of years. And one of the things that is one of the observables of what these craft seem to do is they're transmedium. In other words, they can operate in space, they can operate in our atmosphere, and they can operate in our water, and they can do all three with the same craft. Now, we build submarines, we build planes, and we build spaceships, but you can't take a spaceship to the bottom of the ocean. And so they're doing something we just don't know how to do right now.
Well, I've been a pretty aggressive scuba diver for like 40 years, and I can tell you that we certainly aren't the alpha when you get down even 30 feet.
That's right.
And
the Navy has long been dealing with the USO problem for a while, and I think your audience would be very surprised to learn that the Navy has obviously they have a persistence underwater for several reasons. And they've been encountering these USOs vis-a-vis through sonar and even visual sightings for decades.
We've seen with some of the deep dive submersibles unmanned, with lights and cameras, there are some creatures down there that don't look like they're from here. That's for damn sure. I don't scoff at that at all. I mean, there could be so much going on down there that we have no idea about. So that's one that I hadn't thought much about, but it's certainly possible. And from when, not where, is something interesting to think about too. Louis, you're on the inside of this, and it's pretty clear without asking you to disclose anything that there is no doubt in your mind that we are not alone. Would that be a safe conclusion on my part?
It is, and it's not really, again, it's not world according to Lou, even if nobody, believe me, I really don't care. The reality is that the government has copious amounts of information and data. Let's look at it this way. You have eyewitness testimony from trained observers, people who can identify that and distinguish the difference between an Su-22 and a MiG-25 from 20 miles away and make a split-second decision: do I shoot it or is it a friend? These are the best of the best Top Gun trained pilots that are seeing these things. Oh, by the way, it's being backed up by radar data, multiple phase arrays, and multiple different types of collection platforms. And oh, by the way, it's also being validated by gun camera footage and FLIR pod footage. So let's go back to the analogy of being in a courtroom. You now have 5 sources, independent sources of collection capabilities of information, all saying the same thing at the same time, at the same place, under the same circumstances. This is not just, oh, maybe someone mistaken ball lightning for something. That's not the case here. We're talking about a very real technology that we have seen come in over a controlled U.S. airspace time and time again, and has the ability to interfere with our nuclear equities. That is a fact. Now, if this was Russia or China, then I think I'd be even more scared, because for me, that's even a worst case scenario, because that means our intelligence apparatus is completely incompetent. Which I don't think that's the case, because I have been in the intelligence community my entire career. It is very capable. And by the way, we forget that there's other type of space-based systems that we have access to as well that are also picking these things up. And it's not just in the electro-optical spectrum. There's other things like hyperspectral technology that can shed a lot of light on something if you know how to use those techniques and those capabilities.
In answer to your question, I would just say I haven't seen a UFO. I haven't been abducted by aliens, and I've never kept a cuddly ET in my closet. But I've had to do it the hard way as a journalist, which is to read a lot of books, to look at reports that have been written around the world, and to talk to basically thousands of people over 30 some years. And you have, when you do that, at some point, you usually have what I call the moment of Zen. That's where you're reading it as a hypothetical and you're very interested. And that's the moment when you kind of push back from the table and it's all quiet and you're thinking to yourself, wow, this actually is real. And that's a little unsettling, but I think more and more people around the planet right now are having that moment. And I guess we're just going to have to live with that. It's not like we have a choice, I guess I would say. This is coming at us. It's been coming at us for a while. And at this point, I hope we get the answer while I'm still alive, because I'd like to know.
And, a lot of this has been discredited, of course, by the government's denial and misinformation. And a lot of it has been by non-credible claims by Bubba, who's drunk on his lawnmower and says he was abducted by aliens because his wife, he didn't come home on time, and that was his excuse. But, we've heard those for a million years on the cover of some tabloid, and that makes people skeptical. But that's what I've said. In the last several years, there's been enough transparency from credible people who weren't drunk on a lawnmower, but instead were flying a multi-million-dollar aircraft with a high degree of training, like, as you say, know the difference between a MiG and a friendly aircraft at 20 miles, and have the detection capability on their panel to know what they're looking at. I had a brother-in-law that flew the 105 Thunder Chief for missile suppression, to get out on a deck and outrun a ground-to-air missile to keep it away from others. And That thing was, moving at Mach 2, and that was incredible at the time. And to think of something going, Mach 5, Mach 6, Mach 7 and making a hard right is just unbelievable. I've flown with the Blue Angels at 7.5 Gs, and good God, to think that there are machines out there that are pulling the kind of Gs you're talking about, there's no explanation for that. That's a whole different type of technology that we certainly don't have it. So it's coming from somewhere. We don't have an explanation for that.
Phil, let me put this into perspective for you. One of the calculations our scientists did on the team back at the Pentagon, we had a team with CIA officers and some officers from some other intel agencies and the Department of Defense. And in one case, known as the USS Nimitz encounter in 2004, November timeframe in the Whiskey operating area, right off the coast of San Diego, they were encountering these objects. The Spy 1 radar that was on the Ticonderoga class at the time, USS Princeton, was the kind of this floating radar, if you will, and it was providing combat control for the aircrafts that were doing maneuvers, what they call workups in the area, and they were detecting these things coming in at 80,000 feet, and within less than a second, 0.7 of a second, hovering 50 feet over the water, and then popping back up again. Now, the energy required to do that has been estimated to be more than the entire energy output of the entire continental United States for a year. So we are dealing with a technology here that, quite frankly, we don't really understand, and we certainly can't replicate it. And if there's any adversarial country out there that can replicate it, I think we've got much bigger problems on our hands. So we have to deal with this. I think it's something that we have. And speaking to your point about near air misses, there are a number of reports out there from the Navy, believe it or not, and even the Air Force, of near air collisions, air safety issues with these UAP, because our pilots have come up close and personal to them. And in some cases, listen to this, splitting a formation right down the middle. Now imagine that, right? You know what a combat formation is. You were flying with the Blue Angels. No, they're wingtip to wingtip, man. They're right there. Imagine something coming so close that you have to split that formation right down the middle to avoid hitting it.
Yeah, that's that makes you nervous.
I have a prediction for your own life, okay? For the longest time, I used to be treated like the drunk uncle at the wedding because of the stigma. People would say, well, don't start talking about UFOs to Bryce. He'll talk your ear off, right? And then that doesn't seem to be happening as much anymore, because instead people come up to me and say, so you know a little bit about UFOs. Do you know what's going on? I had something happen to me. And the quote, I have something happen to me, I've heard over 100 times. And Dr. Phil, because you've actually done a show about this now, I guarantee you that 2 or 3 or half a dozen people who are going to probably feel like it's safe to tell you their story now. And when they do, I believe that the story they'll tell you will be highly strange. And yet, at the same time, you'll look at the people telling it to you and you'll say, these are straight shooting people. These people weren't drunk on the lawnmower, as you said. And by the way, I find that the really interesting part of the stigma. In 2006, there was a hovering craft seen by many people over Chicago O'Hare Airport. And one of the people at the airport calls the tower to turn it to say, what is this thing that we're all looking at that's hovering over it? And the response from the air control tower was, what have you been drinking? Right? I think those days are rapidly coming to an end. And we're, like I said, I think we're moving into something brand new right now. And by virtue of even taking it seriously, I hate to say, you're now part of it.
Great point. Look, I can tell you firsthand, I've been to Congress, and I won't say who, but there are members of Congress who are now starting to have this conversation with me. I remember seeing one representative a while back, and he told me a story about how he and his son were fishing in a lake, and one of these things popped right out of the water, right in front of him and his son. So I think you're absolutely right, Bryce. I think people are feeling more encouraged now than ever to start having this conversation in a way without feeling judged or potentially marginalized.
Well, you guys are certainly opening my mind way up, and I don't want to hear about either one of you drunk on a lawnmower anytime soon. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
That's going to ruin all of my credibility for talking about this.
I will stay off any moving vehicle of that nature, I promise you.
Well, listen, this has been an absolutely intriguing conversation, and I think everybody has to take this seriously. Louis' book, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, is something that I highly recommend you pick up and read. It's got some redactions in it, but that makes it all the more intriguing, in my opinion.
It's such a great book, by the way, that I own 5 copies of it. One is my own, and the other 4 I give to friends, and I say, maybe you should read this. Why don't you read this? And when you're done with it, call me and tell me what you think. And I've gotten so many people that say the same thing you just said, which is, wow, that really opened my eyes up. I mean, this is a real deal. I don't know what it is, but I want to know more.
And I want to know more, and I hope you guys will agree to come back and let's talk about this some more. And again, keep me posted on new things that you learn and hear about, but let's talk about this again, okay?
Absolutely.
It'll be my pleasure.
Well, it's been very enlightening, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the intelligent conversation about a serious subject. So thank you very much, and I look forward to us chatting about this again. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for doing the show. Really appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
All right, sir. Take care and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yes, thank you so much.